My name is Edmund Thorne, and I'm 67 years old. I've spent 42 years working as a structural engineer in Wellington, designing the bones of buildings that hold up against southerly storms and the occasional shake from beneath. I know how things stand. I know how they fall. What I didn't know, until 8 months ago, was that the most carefully constructed life can collapse in a single night, and that the person who pulls the foundation out from under you might be sitting at your dinner table, smiling at your daughter, calling you dad. I want you to listen to this story carefully. Because if you have grown children, if you have ever co-signed anything for family, if you have ever trusted a son-in-law because your daughter loved him, then what happened to me could happen to you. And by the time you realize it, the documents will already be signed, the money will already be moved, and the person you raised from a baby will be standing across from you saying she doesn't know who to believe anymore. It started on a Tuesday in March. The Wellington wind was doing what Wellington wind does, rattling the sash windows of my villa in Karori, the one I'd lived in since 1989, the one I'd paid off 2 years before my wife Margaret passed away from ovarian cancer. Margaret and I had one daughter, Phoebe, who is now 34 years old. Phoebe had married a man named Damon Whitfield 3 years earlier, and from the very beginning, I had a feeling about him I couldn't quite explain. He was charming. Too charming, perhaps. He had the kind of handshake that lingered a half-second too long, and he always seemed to know what I wanted to hear before I knew it myself. But Phoebe loved him. And after losing Margaret, the last thing I wanted was to lose my daughter too. So I kept my mouth shut. I learned to nod when Damon spoke about his property development consultancy, his connections in Auckland, his imminent breakthrough deals. I told myself I was being a suspicious old man. I told myself my daughter knew what she was doing. That Tuesday morning, Phoebe came to see me. She was 4 months pregnant, glowing in that way young women do when they are carrying their first child. And she sat at my kitchen table and held my hand and asked me if I would help. Damon had found an opportunity, she said. A commercial property in Lower Hutt that was being sold at distressed value because the previous owner had gone into liquidation. Damon needed $320,000 to secure it as part of a joint venture with 2 other investors, and the bank wanted a guarantor with a strong asset position. The villa in Karori was worth nearly $1.5 million. I had a clean credit history. I had my superannuation. I had everything Damon needed and nothing he had himself. I should have said no right then. I should have said, Phoebe, if this deal is so good, why can't Damon's 2 investors guarantee his portion? I should have said, my love, why are you asking me when your husband should be the one having this conversation? But she was crying a little, the way she used to cry when she was 8 and had broken something she shouldn't have been touching. And she said, Dad, this baby is going to need a future. This is our chance. And I, fool that I am, I said yes. We met with the bank manager 3 weeks later. Damon was there in his expensive suit, all teeth and confidence, and he had brought a stack of documents that he said his solicitor had prepared. The bank manager, a young woman named Caitlin, who looked at me with what I now recognize as professional concern, asked me 3 times if I understood what I was signing. I told her I did. I told her I was acting as guarantor on a commercial loan to a company called Whitfield Property Holdings Limited, of which Damon was the sole director, for the sum of $320,000 secured against my Karori villa. I signed where she pointed. I signed where Damon pointed. There were a great many places to sign, and after the first dozen pages, I stopped reading them carefully. I trusted my son-in-law. I trusted the bank. I trusted the system. That was my first mistake. When the loan went through, Damon was beside himself. He insisted on taking me out to celebrate, just the 2 of us. A proper father and son-in-law evening, he called it. Phoebe was tired and didn't want to come, and he said that was fine. This was a chance for the men of the family to bond. He picked me up at 6 in the evening on a Friday and drove me into the city, to a place on Courtenay Place I'd never been to before, one of those upmarket whiskey bars with leather couches and a wall of bottles backlit in amber. He ordered for both of us. He insisted on paying. He kept toasting to the future, to the baby, to the deal, to family. The first whiskey went down smooth, so did the second. By the third, I was telling him stories about Margaret, about meeting her at a tramping club in 1981, about how I'd known I would marry her after our second walk together. I was getting sentimental. I was getting loose. He kept ordering, and he kept watching me, and somewhere around the 4th or 5th round, he leaned forward and said, "One more, Dad. Just one more. A proper toast to the baby." I remember nodding. I remember the glass in front of me. I don't remember drinking it. I woke up the next morning in the back of my own car, parked at the far end of the car park at the Petone foreshore. The sun was up. The seagulls were screaming. My head felt like it had been split open with a chisel. My mouth tasted of metal and bile. I had no idea how my car had got there. No idea how I had got there. And when I fumbled for my mobile phone, it took me 3 tries to make my fingers work properly. The screen lit up and showed me 23 missed calls. 23. From Phoebe. The earliest was at 2:30 in the morning. The latest was 19 minutes ago. I sat there in the driver's seat, the wind coming off the harbor, and I tried to make sense of what I was looking at. There were also 7 text messages. The first ones were worried. "Dad, where are you? Damon came home alone and said you'd left in a taxi. Please call." Then they got frantic. "Dad, Damon says you were drunk and angry. What happened? Please answer." Then the last one, sent 40 minutes ago, said only, "The bank just rang me. Please call me right now. Something is very wrong." My hands were shaking when I rang her back. She picked up on the first ring, and her voice was sharp in a way I had never heard before. "Dad," she said, "what did you do?" I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. I told her I had woken up at Petone with no memory of the night before. There was a long silence, and then she said, "Dad, the bank called me this morning. They said you came in yesterday afternoon, before the celebration, and signed an additional facility, a personal loan against the villa, for $470,000. The money was transferred yesterday at 4:15 in the afternoon to Damon's company account. They want to know if everything is all right because you seemed very confused." I felt the cold come into me then, slowly. The way cold comes into a body that's been in the water too long. I told her I had not signed any such thing. I told her the only document I had signed was the guarantee, 3 weeks ago, in front of Caitlin. Phoebe said, "Dad, the bank has the paperwork. They have your signature. They have your driver's license on file. They watched you sign it." I said, "Phoebe, listen to me. I did not sign anything yesterday. I was not at the bank yesterday. I was at home until your husband collected me at 6 in the evening. There must be some mistake." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, Damon is here. He says you went to the bank in the afternoon, and then you were strange all evening, that you were drinking too much and saying things that didn't make sense, and then you stormed out and got into a taxi. He says he's been worried sick. He says you've been forgetting things lately. He says maybe you need to see a doctor." That was the moment I understood what had happened to me. I understood it with the same cold clarity I'd used for 42 years to read a structural drawing and see exactly where the load was carried and exactly where it would fail. My son-in-law had drugged me. He had taken my driver's license from my wallet while I was unconscious. Or perhaps he had photocopied it earlier without my knowing. He had not, of course, made me sign anything in the bar. He had done something far cleverer. He had used the time he knew I would be incapacitated to construct a narrative around a transaction that he himself had carried out earlier in the day, using forged documents, exploiting my position as guarantor, and the bank's casual approach to additional borrowing against an existing security. And he was now, in real time, on the telephone with my own daughter, planting the seed that her father was a confused old drunk who couldn't be trusted. I drove home very slowly. My head was pounding. I went straight to my study, where I keep my driver's license in the top drawer of my desk, and there it was, exactly where it should have been. So he had not stolen the original. He had used a copy, which meant this had been planned, not a spur-of-the-moment opportunity. Planned. For weeks. Possibly for months. I went to the bank at noon. I asked to speak with the manager. Caitlin came out, and the moment she saw my face, I knew that something had changed in the way she looked at me. She brought me into a small meeting room and closed the door, and she said, "Mr. Thorne, I have to tell you that we are very concerned about what happened yesterday." I told her what I am telling you now. I told her I had not been in that bank. I told her I had been drugged. She listened, and she took notes, and when I had finished, she said something I have not been able to forget. She said, "Mr. Thorne, the person who came in yesterday matched your photo identification, presented your physical driver's license, and answered all of our security questions correctly. They knew your mother's maiden name. They knew the suburb you grew up in. They knew the name of the first primary school you attended. I'm sorry, but our records show that you were here." I sat in that little room, and I thought about every conversation I had ever had with Damon over the past 3 years. The Sunday lunches, the cups of tea after dinner, the casual chats about my childhood in Lower Hutt, about my mum's family who were originally from Greymouth, about the school in Naney I'd gone to before they'd built the new one. He had been collecting it. He had been farming me for years, and the man who walked into the bank yesterday afternoon with my driver's license had not been me. It had been someone who looked enough like me, in glasses and a hat, who had been coached on every answer. I went to the police that afternoon. I sat in a small fluorescent-lit room at Wellington Central and told my story to a detective named Officer Maeve Taipeen, a woman of about 40 with very steady eyes. She listened without interrupting. When I had finished, she said, "Mr. Thorne, I believe you. I want you to know that. But I have to also tell you that proving what you have just told me in a way that will allow us to recover your money is going to be extremely difficult. Your son-in-law is your daughter's husband. The bank has documentation. The money has already been moved through several accounts and is, almost certainly, no longer in this country." She told me that there had been a string of similar cases in Auckland and Christchurch over the past 2 years. Elderly guarantors. Trusted family members. The pattern was always the same. I asked her if she could arrest him. She said no. Not yet. She said if I went home and accused him, he would simply deny it, and Phoebe would be caught between us, and any chance we had of recovering anything would be destroyed. She said, "Mr. Thorne, what we need is for you to do nothing, to go home, to act as if you believe the story he is telling, and to give us time to build the case properly." I went home that night, and Phoebe was waiting for me on the front porch, in a coat that no longer fit properly across her belly. She had been crying. She stood up when I came up the path, and she said, "Dad, Damon told me everything. He said you've been struggling since Mum died. He said you've been drinking more than you let on. He said yesterday you were furious about the deal, that you wanted more control, that you went to the bank without telling him and signed for additional money and then refused to give it to him. He said when you got drunk, you admitted you'd been planning to cut him out of the property entirely. Dad," she said, "just tell me the truth. I'm not angry. I just need to know what's happening. I looked at my daughter, my only child, the little girl I had taught to ride a bike on the path beside the Hutt River. And I said the hardest thing I have ever said to anyone in my life. I said, "Phoebe, I'm sorry. I think I've made a mess of things. I think I had too much to drink. I'm not as young as I was. I'm sorry, my love. I'll sort it out." She hugged me. She said, "Dad, it's all right. We'll figure it out as a family." And over her shoulder, through the front window of my own house, I could see Damon standing in my kitchen, drinking from one of Margaret's good teacups, watching us. And he smiled at me. He raised the cup, just slightly, in a small private toast. I smiled back. For the next 11 weeks, I did exactly what Officer Taiping had told me to do. I let Damon and Phoebe move into my villa, ostensibly to help look after me. I let Damon take over my checkbook, my online banking, my correspondence. I sat through dinners where he explained to Phoebe that I was in early cognitive decline and that he was so glad he could be there to support the family. I let him think I was beaten. I let him think I was a confused old man who didn't understand what had happened to him. And every night, after they had gone to bed, I went into my study and I worked. Because what Damon Whitfield did not know, and what Officer Taiping was very glad to learn, was that Edmund Thorne had spent 42 years as a structural engineer. And that meant Edmund Thorne kept records of every email, records of every bank statement, records of every phone call. Because Margaret had been a barrister, and she had taught me, decades ago, to keep a diary of significant conversations with dates and times. I went back through 3 years of records, and I started to find things. I found that Damon had asked me, in October of 2023, what primary school I had attended. He had framed it as a casual conversation about how the education system had changed. I had a diary entry from that night. I found that he had asked me about my mother's maiden name in February of 2024. In the context of researching his own family tree. Diary entry. I found that he had borrowed my reading glasses one Sunday in November to look at something on his phone and had gone outside with them for nearly 20 minutes. I had wondered at the time why he needed them outside. Now I knew. He had taken a photograph of my license, and the glasses were a pretext to step away. I also went looking for Whitfield Property Holdings Limited. I went to the company's office. I downloaded every filing. The company had been incorporated 4 months before Damon had married my daughter. There were no other directors. There were no employees. There were no real assets. The 2 so-called investors that Damon had mentioned to Phoebe did not exist. The commercial property in Lower Hutt that he had supposedly purchased was a real property, but a search of the title showed it had been sold to a different buyer entirely, 6 weeks before Damon had even mentioned it to me. And then I found something that made me sit very still in my study for nearly an hour. I found, through an old colleague who still worked in commercial real estate, that Damon Whitfield was not Damon Whitfield's real name. He had been born Daniel Whitcomb in Tauranga in 1989. He had changed his name by deed poll in 2017, 6 months after being released from a sentence at Rimutaka prison for fraud. There had been a previous wife, in Hamilton. There had been her father, a retired school teacher named Bryce Mahoney, who had lost his life savings, $290,000, in a property scheme that had collapsed in a manner remarkably similar to the one Damon was now running on me. Bryce Mahoney had taken his own life 8 months after the loss. His daughter, the wife, had divorced Damon while he was inside and had moved to Australia. I sat at my desk that night and I cried. Not for myself. For Bryce Mahoney, whom I had never met, and who had not had what I had. 2 years of professional discipline in keeping records, a daughter he could still save, and a chance to fight back. I took everything to Officer Taiping the following morning. She and her colleagues from the financial crime group went through it all, and by the end of the week, They had built a case that connected Damon to 3 other families across the North Island, 2 of whom had refused to come forward out of shame, and 1 of whom had been preparing to. They had bank records. They had voice samples from a colleague at the bank in Lower Hutt who had been bribed to look the other way during the second loan transaction, and who had since been arrested and was cooperating. But they needed one more thing. They needed Damon to incriminate himself directly on a recording. While believing he had won, we chose the venue together. Officer Taiping wanted somewhere public, somewhere Damon would relax, somewhere there were already cameras in operation. We chose the wine bar at the top of the new tower on Customhouse Quay, the one with the harbor view, the one where men like Damon like to be seen. I told him I wanted to take him out for a drink, just the 2 of us, to apologize, to tell him that I now understood I had been confused, that I was grateful for everything he and Phoebe had done for me, and that I wanted to discuss restructuring the family finances so that he had proper, formal control of my affairs going forward. He could barely contain himself. He almost danced into the lift on the way up. We sat at a corner table with the lights of Wellington spread out beneath us, and I ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir from Marlborough, the same vineyard Margaret and I had visited on our 30th anniversary. I poured for him. I let him talk. I let him explain to me, with growing confidence as the wine went down, exactly how he saw the family's future. He told me that with full power of attorney, he could sell the Karori villa and reinvest the proceeds into a much more diversified portfolio. He told me that he had been thinking about moving Phoebe and the baby to the Gold Coast, where there were better opportunities. He told me that I would, of course, be welcome to come too, although a smaller unit closer to medical care would probably be more appropriate at my age. And then, because the wine was good, and because he believed he had won, he said the thing that Officer Taiping had been waiting for. He leaned in, and he said, "You know, Edmund, I've got to be honest with you. That night at the whiskey bar, I was worried I'd given you too much. I had to half carry you to the car. But you took the lorazepam beautifully. 2 milligrams in the 3rd, whiskey, and you didn't even taste it. I'd been practicing, you know, with Phoebe's prescriptions, working out the right dose for someone your weight. You slept like a baby in the car park. I was very gentle with you, in case you were wondering. I just needed the morning. You see, to make sure the timing of the second loan looked right to anyone who came asking." He laughed. He actually laughed. And at the table behind us, a man in a gray jacket who had been quietly drinking a beer for the past half hour stood up. And so did the couple at the table to our left. And so did the bartender. Officer Taiping came across the floor with 3 uniformed officers behind her, and she said, "Daniel Whitcomb, I am arresting you on charges of fraud, drug-facilitated assault, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say may be used in evidence." He looked at me. He looked at me for a long time. I drank the last of my Pinot Noir, and I set the glass down, and I said, "My late wife was a barrister, you know. She always said the most dangerous person in the room is the one you've decided is harmless. You should have asked Phoebe about her mother before you started this." They took him out in handcuffs. The other patrons, the real ones, applauded. I sat at the table for a while afterwards, looking out at the harbor, and I thought about Bryce Mahoney, and I raised my glass to him, even though it was empty. The trial took 14 months. Damon was convicted on every charge. He is currently serving 9 years and 4 months at Rimutaka, the same prison he had been in before. The funds that had been transferred to his company account were largely unrecoverable. But the bank, faced with clear evidence of fraud against an elderly customer and the cooperation of their own corrupt employee, agreed to write off the $470,000 personal loan in full and to release the guarantee against the original $320,000. My villa is unencumbered. My superannuation is intact. My credit is restored. Phoebe is the harder part of this story, and I want to tell it honestly, because I think there are too many stories in the world that pretend the wounds inside families heal more easily than they do. When she found out the truth, when Officer Petone sat her down and played her the recording from the wine bar, she did not collapse into my arms. She did not beg my forgiveness. She went very quiet for a long time. And then she went home to her mother's sister in New Plymouth. And she had her baby there, alone, in October, a little boy. She named him Thomas, after my father. She did not tell me he was born. I found out from my sister-in-law 3 days later. It took her another 4 months to come and see me. When she did, she sat at the same kitchen table where this had all begun. And she said, "Dad, I don't know how to ask you to forgive me." I told her she didn't need to ask. I told her that being lied to by someone you love is not a crime, and that I had been lied to by the same man, and that I understood. But I also told her something else. I told her that I would not be giving her money. I told her that I had restructured my will so that the villa and my superannuation would, on my death, pass into a trust for Thomas, with an independent trustee, and that she would receive a modest annual stipend from me while I was alive, but no lump sums and no further guarantees, ever, for any reason. I told her that I loved her, but that love and financial enabling were not the same thing, and that I had learned this lesson too late and at too great a cost to forget it. She cried. She said she understood. She is now living in a small flat in Karori, near me, raising Thomas on her own and working part-time as a teacher's aide. We see each other every Sunday. She brings the baby. We are slowly, carefully, rebuilding something. It will not be what it was, but it may, in time, be something honest, which is more than what we had before. Now, before I let you go, I want to say a few things to anyone who is listening to this and who is over 60, or who has parents over 60, because I believe I have earned the right to speak plainly about this. First, never act as the primary borrower for an adult child or in-law. If they cannot get a loan in their own name, the bank has already told you something important. You can be a guarantor if you must, but understand exactly what that means, and have your own solicitor, not theirs, explain it to you in writing. Second, never give power of attorney to a family member without an independent oversight mechanism, such as a second attorney who must co-sign every significant decision. The kindest, most loving person you know can change, or can be replaced in your life by someone who is not who they appear to be. Third, if someone asks you a great many specific questions about your past, your mother's maiden name, the schools you attended, the streets you lived on, please understand that this is not always nostalgia. It is sometimes reconnaissance. Be careful what you give away, even at your own dinner table. Fourth, and this is the most important one, the worst thing you can do after being deceived is to stay silent out of shame. The reason men like Daniel Whitcomb succeed for so long is that their victims are too embarrassed to come forward. If something has happened to you, or if something feels wrong right now, please ring the police. Please ring Age Concern. Please ring a friend. The shame belongs to the person who lied to you, not to you. And finally, to my daughter Phoebe, if you ever listen to this, I love you. I have always loved you. And the hardest love is the love that says no when saying yes would be easier. Your mother taught me that a long time before I was wise enough to understand her. My name is Edmund Thorne. I am 67 years old. I live in a villa in Karori with the wind rattling the sash windows. And on Sunday afternoons, my grandson Thomas comes to visit, and he is learning to walk on the same path beside the Hutt River where I once taught his mother to ride a bike. The foundations held, just barely, but they held.